Today's video is brought to you by Holzka, and more on them later. 154 years ago, in 1869, America witnessed a galactic-sized leap forward in transportation tech. That year, the first transcontinental rail line was opened, connecting the long-settled East Coast with the very distant West. With its arrival, American life was transformed. Whereas once going west had meant months of braving dangerous routes, treacherous weather, and the possibility of having to cannibalize your stranded companions, now it simply meant buying a train ticket, kicking back, and watching the continent sweep past in barely a week. For those who lived through it, it must have been a transformational moment, an era in which the boundaries of the great wide world suddenly became visibly smaller. The good news? Well, we might be living through an equally epochal age, one that will shrink not just the borders of the world, but of the entire solar system. As you watch this, engineers connected to NASA are working on a new generation of rockets that will combine nuclear thermal and nuclear electric propulsion to slash travel times. Getting to Mars, for example, will no longer take 7 months. Rather, it'll take a mere 45 days. And that raises some tantalizing possibilities of soon witnessing a crewed Mars landing, of colonization. Possibilities that may finally turn humans into an interplanetary species. For fans of extremely dorky news, 2023 started with a delightful present: the announcement of the latest Phase 1 funding for NASA's Innovative Advanced Concepts Program. Known as NIAC, the program is where science dreams are born. It's a space equivalent of Walt Disney's Imagineering department, a place where fascinating concepts are explored and fleshed out in the hopes of one day becoming real. This year's selection did not disappoint. Among our favorites are Titan Air, a flying boat that would explore the methane seas of Saturn's largest moon, and a plan to use lasers to accelerate a 1-ton payload to so fast that it would cross 500 astronomical units of space in a mere 15 years. But even among these gems, there was one proposal that really stood out, a proposal that could conceivably alter our conception of solar system distances. A proposal to design nuclear rockets that could fly humans to Mars in just 45 days. The brainchild of Ryan Goss and the University of Florida, the project is officially known by the deeply unsexy name of New Class of Bimodal NTP/NEP with a wave cycle, rotor, topping cycle enabling fast transit to Mars. Yeah, they could have come up with a better name, couldn't they? But what this word salad lacks in credibility, it more than makes up for with its revolutionary content. The NTP part of that title stands for Nuclear Thermal Propulsion, a system that powers rockets by using an onboard reactor to heat liquid propellant, turning it into gas and expelling it out of a nozzle to create thrust. It's twice as efficient as the chemical rocket systems that we use today and can quickly speed up a craft to an ungodly velocity. NEP, on the other hand, stands for Nuclear Electric Propulsion. Unlike NTP, NEP uses a reactor to create electricity. This current is then used to positively charge an inert gas like xenon and fire the ions out of a thruster, pushing the craft forward. Unlike NTP, nuclear electric propulsion creates a relatively gentle thrust. Apply it for a long time, though, and the craft can build up to incredible speeds, all while using remarkably little propellant. Together, these two systems, NTP and NEP, are the major forms of nuclear propulsion that space agencies are considering for development. But the University of Florida plan goes further. Rather than just working on NTP or NEP, it envisages sticking both systems onto a single rocket, and that's the bimodal part of that long-ass title. As their proposal puts it, to quote, "This bimodal design enables the fast transit for manned missions, 45 days to Mars, and revolutionizes the deep space exploration of our solar system." Which is great news for NASA, as getting to Mars is something the agency is desperate to do. Today's video is brought to you by Holzka, and for those of you who are not familiar, Holzka creates beautiful watches and jewelry from natural materials. Look, Holzka may have started small, but they've come a long way. They've now almost had 1 million happy customers, and it's not hard to see why. Their products are absolutely unique and made with so much care and attention to detail. Personally, I love this watch that I have here. It's got this beautiful wooden design. It's this blue steel and then wooden design all through the links here, which does make it unique and great looking. Each watch is made with natural material, so every piece is completely unique. And not only that, but the quality and comfort's fantastic. But don't just take my word for it. There are so many amazing products to choose from on their website. They've got watches, jewelry, sunglasses, and even handbags. And the designs are varied, so there's something for everyone. But it's not just about products. Hull's kind of amazing philosophy. They believe in creating personal pieces of nature that remind you to spend time consciously, be proud and unique, and have an emotional connection with nature. In fact, they even support reforestation projects and other initiatives that promote environmental protection and social support. So not only do you get an amazing product, but you're also supporting a company that gives back to nature. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to world.holzgen.com/en_world/megaprojects. There's a link to that below, and use the promo code MEGA15 to get 15% off all products and a free polishing cloth worth €15. Trust me, you won't regret it. And now back to today's video. Since 2020, NASA has been under a 10-year deadline imposed by the White House to show off its nuclear prowess by safely depositing a 10-kilowatt power system on the surface of the moon. A year later, Congress handed the agency an extra $110 million to design nuclear rockets that could be used for interplanetary voyages. This dovetailed nicely with NASA's own plans to investigate bimodal NTP/NEP systems, which has been a priority since 2017. The results? A whole new set of deadlines. One, to use a nuclear robot to place cargo on Mars by 2033. Another, to place humans on the Red Planet by 2039. The University of Florida proposal is an integral part of making this happen. Now, before you rush off to pack your spacesuit, we should be clear that this is still early days of development. The NIAC's Phase 1 grant is just $12,500 per project. Even if it succeeds beyond everybody's wildest dreams, it's a few years out from becoming reality. Still, it's a good opportunity for us to take a closer look at NASA's nuclear rocket and Mars landing plans in general. But trust me, if you're anything like us, what you're about to hear will make you extremely excited for the future. At this stage, you might be wondering why NASA are so invested in nuclear propulsion. I mean, sure, it's quicker, but it's not like regular old chemical rockets are incapable of reaching the Red Planet. After all, we've already deposited multiple rovers on our cosmic sibling. But the point is that rovers are not humans. They're machines, robots that we can deposit on the Martian surface and then leave there once the mission is over. Astronauts, by contrast, well, they're living people. People NASA has a major need not just to get to Mars, but to keep alive and then get them back.
Surprise.
And it turns out that the goal of not letting everyone die, like in some sci-fi horror movie, is made easier by using nuclear propulsion. To understand why, let's have a quick look at travel times. We mentioned in the opening how a normal trip to Mars takes around 7 months on chemical rockets, compared to just 45 days with nuclear propulsion. But this doesn't come close to explaining just how long a mission would really be. Mars, like the other planets, is not a fixed distance from Earth. Because we all go whizzing around the sun at different speeds, our sibling is sometimes relatively nearby and sometimes right on the other side of our parent star. That means that Mars missions can only be launched every 26 months when Planet 4 is at its closest, what's known as Mars opposition. And this isn't just something that needs to be considered on the outward journey. Waiting for the right planetary alignment for a return trip will require astronauts to spend at least a year on Mars. Add in the outward and return journey times, each lasting between 6 and 9 months, and you could potentially wind up having each Mars mission last nearly 3 years. That's 3 years in which your crew will need to be kept alive, 3 years in which they'll spend a dangerously long amount of time in space, where they'll likely be exposed to radiation and deal with microgravity and other stuff that does things to your body that watching MSNBC does to your brain. Ruin it. For these reasons, NASA is trying to cut mission times down to a maximum of 2 years. Shaving 5 months or more off both outward and return journeys will be a massive help with that. But it's not just astronaut health that NASA is having to worry about. The second major improvement nuclear propulsion brings is far more prosaic. It's much, much cheaper. Chemical rockets require lots of propellant, so much that just getting enough propellant off Earth for a single Mars mission could set NASA back $80 billion. Last year, Scientific American crunched the numbers. The International Space Station weighs 420 metric tons and took a decade of launches to assemble. Well, the propellant alone for a Mars mission could weigh between twice and 10 times that. This means between 840 and 4,200 tons of material that NASA would need to get into space just to act as fuel. On current systems, that could cost nearly $80 billion in launches. Even when SpaceX's Starship, which can haul up to 100 tons, starts making routine flights, it'll still be a time-consuming and expensive endeavor. By contrast, nuclear propulsion offers virtually unlimited energy density. The total mass for a nuclear rocket and its fuel source together would be somewhere in the region of 500 to 1,000 tons. Sure, it's still heavy, but it's no longer prohibitively heavy. With fewer launches, the cost of a mission would plummet. This in turn makes flying to Mars less off-putting to the people funding NASA, so everybody wins. So that's the why of nuclear propulsion, as in, why is this a good idea? Let's now turn to the what, or more accurately, the question of what the heck is all this tech anyway? When making a video like this about cutting-edge tech, it's often easier to focus on all of the benefits that it can bring. It makes the story more exciting. It makes it a lot more fun to research as well. Of course, though, real life rarely presents us with technology free of downsides. If it did, we'd all be living in the culture and enjoying unlimited pleasure instead of existing in a world of Twitter algorithms and creepy Microsoft chatbots. And that goes for NTP and NEP. While both have massive advantages to recommend them, they both also come with their own set of headaches and challenges. Let's look at nuclear thermal propulsion first. As we mentioned earlier, NTP runs by using a nuclear reactor to heat a propellant, liquid hydrogen, until it becomes an ionized gas and is expelled out of the rocket's backside like some gigantic space fart, and that generates thrust. The issue here is that to heat the propellant, the reactor has to be operating at some pretty high temperatures around the 2,500 Celsius, that's 4,500 Fahrenheit mark. Making sure it maintains those temperatures and works well in deep space without endangering the craft is a pretty tricky challenge, one that gives material engineers cluster headaches. On top of that, NTP still needs vast amounts of propellant. A mere fraction of what chemical rocket requires, sure, but still enough that engineers will need to figure out how to incorporate serious-sized storage tanks. The flip side is that once it's all in place, an NTP rocket is pretty straightforward. You use the system to build up tremendous speed in mere hours, hurling yourself towards Mars. An NEP system, by contrast, requires weeks or even months to gradually build up the velocity it's capable of. It's only by running for very long times that ion engines in general can generate significant levels of thrust. And this is a problem because nuclear electric propulsion also generates massive amounts of unwanted thermal energy. So NASA needs to come up with a way to dissipate it all safely, a process that could involve equipping the craft with giant radiators on the outside. The word could in that last sentence is a clue to another issue with NEP. It's a relatively new technology that requires a lot more development compared to NTP. But while an NTP rocket alone would shave months off a trip to Mars, it's not the fastest method out there. No, that would be a rocket that combines both NTP and NEP systems. And this is where the University of Florida proposal that we opened with comes back in. While not the only team looking at bimodal nuclear propulsion, the Florida guys have some extra bells and whistles on their design that make it even more attractive. Specifically, they've included a pressure wave supercharger. Now look, we're not rocket scientists, we can't pretend to fully understand these things any more than rocket scientists fully understand how to present popular YouTube channels while rocking a spectacular blazer. These things are definitely equal in their complexity. So instead of trying to explain it ourselves, we're just going to use this quote from the wonderful Universe Today. The proposal also includes a pressure wave supercharger, or wave rotor, WR, a technology used in internal combustion engines that harnesses the pressure waves produced by reactions to compress intake air. When paired with an NTP engine, the WR would use the pressure created by the reactor's heating of the LH2 fuel to compress the reaction mass further. In other words, it will generate a whole extra level of thrust, one that only increases when you include an NEP. Right now, NTP engines create what's called a specific impulse of 900 seconds. Sticking the wave rotor onto it will increase that to 1400 to 2000 seconds. Add in the wave rotor in the NEP cycle and you get a specific impulse of 1800 to 4000 seconds. Even non-rocket scientists like us can see that that's a fairly massive improvement. It's how we could see a ship get to Mars in 45 days. Not that ideas like this just appear out of the ether, though. Impressive as it is, the Florida team's concept is only possible thanks to decades of groundwork. Considering it's currently 2023 and flying a crude nuclear rocket to Mars remains sadly hypothetical, it'll either blow your mind or really burn you out to hear that NASA first considered doing this in, wait for it, 1958. That means that Eisenhower was still in the White House when the agency commissioned a formal study for a nuclear-powered 420-day mission to Mars. In fact, it was so far back that NASA didn't even exist yet. At this stage, it was just the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. Regardless, the vision of American astronauts planting these stars and stripes on the red planet was still enticing enough that serious work went into the program. Work that took it farther than anyone could have predicted. In tandem with the Space Nuclear Propulsion Office, NASA spent a whole chunk of the 1960s working on something called NERVA, an acronym for Nuclear Engine for Rocket Vehicle Applications. Opened in 1963, the program would lead to 23 nuclear reactor tests at a government site in Nevada's wonderfully named Jackass Flats. By the end of the decade, the SNPO would have certified an NTP solid-core nuclear thermal engine as suitable for crewed missions. Prototype rockets were tested here on Earth. But NASA riding nuclear rockets to Mars became central to the agency's vision for following up on the Apollo program. And all of which raises a rather obvious question. What happened? How come we're not now living in a world where the US put a man on Mars several decades ago? Well, for that, you can thank the man responsible for so many of his era's disappointments, Richard Nixon. In 1973, the Nixon White House axed the nuclear propulsion project and ruthlessly slashed NASA's budget. What was left was directed not towards exploring Mars, but towards the Space Shuttle program. Interestingly, this wasn't the end of the NTP dream. The USSR was working on its own nuclear propulsion concept, which continued to be funded even as the American one shut down. But the Soviet program was beset by its own problems, and work folded in 1980 without a single test. And so, the NTP dream died, not to be revived until much closer to our own era, by which time there'd be a whole other form of nuclear propulsion in the mix. NEP had been around as a theory for a little while, but it was only in 2003 that NASA went ahead and teamed up with the US Navy and the Department of Energy to flesh out the concept for Project Prometheus. Unlike the 1958 project, no one in 2003 was imagining astronauts walking on Mars. They were more interested in making probes that could go really far, really fast, and pull off some incredible science. Unfortunately, Prometheus was canned by NASA in 2005 due to issues with NASA's budget. It's only been recently, as the agency has gotten interested in boosting solar electric propulsion tech for its upcoming Artemis moon missions, that NEP has rebounded as a concept. Now that it has, though, it looks a whole lot like it might be here to stay. Unlike in 1973 or 2005, there are currently no signs that NASA or Congress are in budget-cutting mode. Instead, we're at a point where NASA is mandated to work on nuclear tech to put a reactor on the moon, where Congress is side-eyeing China's burgeoning space program and appropriating extra money to make sure that the US stays ahead of the game. As a result, dollars are starting to flow into projects like the University of Florida one, projects that could transform our current methods of interplanetary travel as profoundly as the railroad transformed journeys across America. And that could pay off sooner than you might think. With a stated goal of landing cargo on Mars in 2033 ahead of human visitation in 2039, NASA only has a limited window of time to get its new hardware designs locked in, to make the choice between NTP, NEP, or a bimodal system. According to Scientific American, the decision realistically needs to come by 2027 to make building a workable rocket in time a reality. That means we might now just be 4 years away from the beginning of a mega project on par with the first transcontinental railroad. One of the things we love about making these space videos is how often they leave us with a sense of wonder, with a sense of standing on the edge of something that will expand our horizons. And in this case, is something that could finally make humankind an interplanetary species. Our species may have been dreaming about this since 1958, but it really seems like now, finally, those bygone dreams may be about to come true.